This project was supported by grant number 2019-AK-BX-0028 awarded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. The Bureau of Justice Assistance is a component of the Department of Justice's Office of Justice Programs, which also includes the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the National Institute of Justice, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, the Office for Victims of Crime, and the SMART Office. Points of view or opinions in this video are those of the author and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. All information contained in this video is shared for general informational purposes only, and the decision to discuss any pending criminal matters referenced herein rests solely with the Texas Department of Public Safety. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this video do not necessarily reflect the views of the Department of Justice or the Bureau of Justice Assistance. To the extent that pending criminal matters are discussed in this video, all such charges are merely accusations, and all defendants and/or suspects referenced herein are presumed innocent until or unless proven guilty.
Hello, my name is Jason Taylor, and I'm the Chief of the Texas Ranger Division at the Texas Department of Public Safety. The Texas Ranger Division is committed to enhancing public safety by working closely alongside local law enforcement agencies around the state to investigate violent criminal offenses. Funding under the Sexual Assault Kit Initiative, also known as SAKI, awarded to our agency by the Bureau of Justice Assistance, or BJA, have furthered our efforts in investigating violent crime by expanding the CODIS database through DNA sample collections and by applying advanced DNA testing methods to violent crime cold cases. We want to take a moment to express our appreciation to law enforcement and criminal justice agencies around the state for their efforts in expanding the CODIS database through DNA sample collections. Thank you for your partnership in this important endeavor.
Hello, my name is Orlando Salinas, and I serve as the Texas DPS SAKI DNA Collection Coordinator for our agency's SAKI grants pertaining to expanding the CODIS database. Over the last few years, I've had the opportunity to work alongside so many dedicated law enforcement officers and criminal justice personnel as we work to expand the CODIS database through DNA collections from eligible individuals. This video will focus on the importance of expanding the CODIS database, DNA collection eligibility and the Texas Computerized Criminal History, DNA statutes in Texas, and crucial opportunities we have to collect a DNA sample. In October 2019, the Texas Ranger Division was awarded a SAKI grant from the Bureau of Justice Assistance to expand the DNA database by performing a census to determine the number of individuals with a qualifying arrest or conviction who were eligible for DNA sample collection, but from whom no sample had been collected or entered into the database. We hypothesized that by expanding the DNA database through these collections, we may observe an increase in the number of CODIS hits to previously untested sexual assault kits and other crimes around the state and nation. As we performed our census and worked closely alongside law enforcement and criminal justice agencies around the state on DNA collections from the individuals identified in our census, we did in fact observe an increase in the number of CODIS hits. The DNA census and subsequent sample collections from the SAKI grant resulted in 276 CODIS hits to a variety of offenses, including capital murder, sexual assault, and sexual assault of a child, to name a few. With this new information, it is clear to see that each of the DNA samples collected by our partners may make a profound difference to victims and survivors of violent crimes. CODIS is the acronym for the Combined DNA Index System and is the generic term used to describe the Federal Bureau of Investigation's program of support for criminal justice DNA databases, as well as the software used to run these databases. For example, in the case of a sexual assault where an evidence kit is collected from the victim, a DNA profile of the suspected perpetrator is developed from the swabs in the kit. The forensic unknown profile attributed to the suspected perpetrator is searched against the state database of convicted offender and arrestee profiles. If there is a candidate match in the convicted offender or arrestee index, the laboratory will confirm the match and, if confirmed, will obtain the identity of the suspected perpetrator. The DNA profile from the SAK or other item of evidence is also searched against the state's database of crime scene DNA. These DNA profiles are called the forensic index within CODIS. If there is a candidate match in the forensic index, the laboratory goes through confirmation procedures and, if confirmed, the match will have linked two or more crimes together. The law enforcement agencies involved in these cases are then able to share the information obtained and possibly develop additional leads. For this reason, it is important to expand the CODIS database by collecting DNA samples from qualifying arrestees and convicted offenders where statute allows. A concern expressed by some regarding DNA sample collection is the constitutionality of DNA sample collection. In 2013, the U.S. Supreme Court provided guidance and clarification on this issue in the Maryland v. King case, in which the Supreme Court held that when officers make an arrest supported by probable cause to hold a suspect for a serious offense and bring that individual to the station to be detained in custody, taking and analyzing a cheek swab of the arrestee's DNA is like fingerprinting and photographing, a legitimate police booking procedure that is reasonable under the Fourth Amendment. The Texas Computerized Criminal History, or CCH, is a repository of information for individuals who have been arrested or convicted of a criminal offense in the state of Texas. Once a record has been created for an individual, the individual is assigned a Texas State Identification Number, or SID, that will appear in the CCH along with the individual's criminal history data. Local booking agencies may use the CCH DNA status as a guideline for DNA sample collection and should review the individual's criminal history and booking offense prior to collecting a DNA sample. The DNA status field in the Texas CCH may be populated with any of the following: Y, C, N, or blank. Here we see an example of a Texas criminal history record where the DNA status for the individual reflects the letter Y. This Y is an indicator to law enforcement and criminal justice agencies in Texas that a DNA sample has been taken for the offender. Per regulations in the state of Texas, an individual's identity must be confirmed via fingerprinting prior to DNA sample entry into the CODIS database. Although the DNA status Y often reflects the individual's DNA sample is in the CODIS database, there are occasions where the DNA status field is populated with a Y because the individual's identity was confirmed via fingerprint. However, the DNA status may revert to one of the other letters if, for example, there was not enough DNA on the swab to complete testing and upload the profile to the CODIS database. For this reason, it is advisable for booking agencies to verify the individual's DNA is in CODIS by emailing codislab@dps.texas.gov. The booking agency will need to provide the individual's Texas State Identification Number, SID, along with the individual's name and date of birth. Here we see a CCH where the DNA status is listed as C. The booking agency should refer to the individual CCH alongside the criminal offense for which the individual is being booked to verify DNA sample collection eligibility. If an individual has a DNA status of C and their CCH, they are likely eligible for DNA sample collection, and a sample should be collected for the individual and sent to the CODIS laboratory. It is important to recall that when statutes pertaining to DNA sample collection are enacted by the state legislature and signed into law by the governor of Texas, there is often an effective date for the statute specified. Our CODIS laboratory will also review the individual's criminal history once a DNA sample is received to verify eligibility prior to uploading the sample into the CODIS database. Here, we see a CCH where the DNA status is listed as N. Similar to the DNA status of C, the DNA status of N is an indicator that there is not a sample currently on file for the individual, and a sample needs to be collected. Here, we see a CCH where the DNA status is blank. Similar to the DNA status of C and the DNA status of N, a blank DNA status is an indicator that there is not a sample on file for the individual, and a sample should be collected for the individual if they are being booked for a qualifying arrest or conviction. Here is an example of the new Texas DPS CODIS Bodie Buccal Collection Kit. Each kit contains everything you will need to collect and submit a DNA sample for entry into the CODIS database. As the new Bodie Buccal Collection Kits are implemented, Texas DPS CODIS will continue to accept the previously used buccal swab kits until all remaining inventories are exhausted. Please refer to the posted DPS collection training video for more information with the QR code provided. Now that you have a better understanding of where to locate information related to the individual's DNA sample collection eligibility, let's discuss relevant DNA statutes in the state of Texas and opportunities for DNA sample collection. Opportunities for DNA sample collection include during the booking process for a qualifying offense or arrest, upon conviction of a qualifying offense, when placed on community supervision for any felony offense, during sex offender registration, while in custody of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice or Texas Juvenile Justice Department. During the 88th Texas Legislative Session, Texas House Bill 3956 was passed and will allow for DNA sample collections for all felony offenses as of September 1st, 2023. Section A1 of this statute states that a law enforcement agency booking a defendant at the same time and in the same location where fingerprinting occurs during the booking process shall require the defendant to provide one or more specimens for the purpose of creating a DNA record. The time of arrest may be the sole opportunity for DNA sample collection from some individuals. Therefore, it is important to incorporate DNA sample collection from eligible individuals into the booking process. According to the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Article 17.47, a magistrate shall require as a condition of release on bail or bond of a defendant that the defendant provide to a local law enforcement agency one or more specimens. This approach allows personnel to de-escalate a booking situation where an individual refuses to provide a DNA sample by working with the magistrate and having the provision of a DNA sample included as part of the terms for the individual's release on bail or bond. When reviewing the criminal history of the individual being booked, the DNA status may be viewed to check DNA sample collection eligibility.
I'm gonna have you open up your mouth. I'm gonna swab both your cheeks.
If the individual does not have a previous criminal history, but has been arrested for a qualifying offense, a DNA sample shall be collected.
Fine, just get it over with.
These DNA collection kits are provided to the agency at no cost by the Texas Department of Public Safety CODIS Laboratory. Once the DNA sample has been collected, the kit is sealed, initialed, dated, and placed in the mail for shipment to the Texas DPS CODIS Laboratory. On occasion, a collected sample may be lost in transit or may be rejected for entry into the database by the CODIS Laboratory. The most common reasons for sample rejections are poor quality fingerprints on the DNA database card included in the kit, poor quality 10-print card on file for the individual, which prevents the individual's identification via fingerprinting, and inadequate amount of DNA on the buccal swabs for sample processing. In addition to collecting during the booking process for qualifying arrests, Texas Government Code 411.1471 also outlines the convictions that qualify for DNA sample collection from an eligible individual. Section A2 of this government code applies to a defendant who is convicted of an offense under Title V of Texas Penal Code that is punishable as a Class A misdemeanor, except for an offense punishable as a Class A misdemeanor under Section 22.05 of the Texas Penal Code, or punishable as a Class A or Class B misdemeanor as applicable under Section 21.08, 25.04, or 43.24 of the Texas Penal Code. This government code also outlines that the DNA sample shall be collected from these individuals after a defendant is convicted. Therefore, the sample should be collected at the time of conviction by a criminal justice agency.
I'll take some samples of your DNA from your cheeks, collect your fingerprints. Let me do the rolling, just relax. And then open your mouth.
Title V offenses are offenses against the person and include the following Texas Penal Code chapters. Chapter 19, Criminal Homicide. Chapter 20, Kidnapping and Unlawful Restraint. Chapter 20A, Trafficking of Persons. Chapter 21, Sexual Offenses. Chapter 22, Assaultive Offenses. All persons with a duty to register as a sex offender in the state of Texas are required to provide a DNA sample to a law enforcement agency upon request. Texas Government Code 411.1473 pertains to DNA sample collections from registered sex offenders. The department, by rule, shall require a law enforcement agency serving as a person's primary registration authority under Chapter 62 or 65 of the Texas Code of Criminal Procedure to take one or more specimens from a person described by subsection A for the purpose of creating a DNA record. Personnel who serve as sex offender registrars for their agency may call upon the registered sex offender at any time if the registrar observes the registered sex offender does not have a DNA sample on file. It should be noted that registered sex offenders who may have provided a DNA sample previously in another state or while in federal custody are still required to provide a DNA sample for entry into the Texas DNA database.
Now I'm going to take your swabs. It's going to be inside of your cheek.
In the 88th Texas legislative session, Texas Senate Bill 1518 was passed and will establish a terrorist offender registration program in January 2024. The Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Article 65.059 states that a person required to register under this chapter shall comply with a request for a DNA specimen made by a law enforcement agency under Section 411.1473 Texas Government Code. If a registered sex offender or terrorist offender refuses to provide a DNA sample upon request from law enforcement personnel serving as the person's primary registration authority, that offender may be charged with Texas Code of Criminal Procedure Article 62.102 or with Article 65.102, respectively. Any individual who is placed on community supervision for a felony offense is eligible for DNA sample collection per Texas Code of Criminal Procedure, Chapter 42A.352. Community supervision personnel should review the individual's criminal history prior to the person reporting for supervision to determine whether a DNA sample has been successfully entered into the database for that individual. If no sample has been entered for the individual, the community supervision personnel shall collect a sample for the individual.
Why y'all just collecting it now?
For some reason, it wasn't collected at the time of your arrest, but a sample is still owed, and it's a part of your terms and condition of your probation.
Similar to the recommendation for booking agencies, CSCDs may document their monthly collections from individuals and send the list to the CODIS laboratory for reconciliation to ensure all collected samples were successfully entered into the database. In the event a sample was lost in transit or rejected by the laboratory, a subsequent sample will need to be collected. Interstate transfers for felony offenses to Texas CSCDs should be treated in the same fashion as individuals on community supervision for a felony offense that occurred in Texas. For individuals who are placed on deferred adjudication for a felony offense, the CODIS laboratory requests that a copy of the judgment be included with the submitted kit. This will allow CODIS personnel to verify the individual's eligibility without having to directly contact the CSCD to request the paperwork. In the event a community supervision department receives custody of an individual who has not been issued a Texas SID number, the CSCD should contact the agency who effected the arrest of the individual and request that the agency submit the arrest paperwork to the Texas Department of Public Safety Crime Records Division. A DNA sample is required for all individuals received into custody by the Texas Department of Criminal Justice or the Texas Juvenile Justice Department, per Texas Government Code 411.148. The DNA samples of individuals in TDCJ or TJJD custody have traditionally been acquired via a blood sample. However, a transition from blood samples to buccal swab samples may occur in the coming years. Although a sample may have been collected and documented, this does not necessarily mean the submitted DNA sample was successfully entered into the CODIS database. TDCJ and TJJD personnel are encouraged to check the DNA status on the Computerized Criminal History for every individual in their custody. If any individual in custody has a DNA status other than Y, a subsequent sample must be collected and submitted to the laboratory.
Your DNA is missing from the state's database.
All right, whatever y'all want.
The Texas Department of Public Safety would like to express our deep appreciation to criminal justice agencies around the state who assist in DNA sample collections, and those who have assisted with our SAKI grant efforts. We would also like to thank the Bureau of Justice Assistance for the opportunity to work on the SAKI grant initiative. Under SAKI, BJA is finding that a significant number of people who have committed multiple violent sexual assaults are being linked to previously unsubmitted or untested sexual assault kits. Not only are these people committing sexual assaults, but they are frequently responsible for homicides and other violent offenses. The Texas Department of Public Safety and the Texas Ranger Division remain committed to bringing the perpetrators of sexual assaults to justice and to increase safety in communities by preventing future sexual assaults. For questions pertaining to the Texas DPS SAKI Grant Initiative, please contact SAKI at dps.texas.gov. Thank you and have a safe day.